Hi, folks. How's it going? Hello, Rob. How are you? I'm doing fine, thank you. Hi, Kay. Hi, Stephen Wolfbrand. Hi, Steve Gonzo and Steve Wolfbrand, says Kay. And I say hi to you too, Steve Gonzo. Steve Gonzo says Rachel Maddow and MSNBC win $258,000 in attorney's fees after beating OAN in court. Evelina Pont says, hi, everybody. Hi, Evelina. Thanks for coming. Everybody, please share as much as you can while not oversharing. I don't want anybody in FB jail. And by the way, there's news of Carmen. Okay, Carmen's fine and is waiting patiently for her period in Facebook jail to end. And I think that's probably going to happen now in another, maybe 4 or 5 days, something like that. It'll be next week anyway that Carmen is back. And there's Bonnie. Hi, honey. Rob says Rob says he's doing okay and that they finally are getting something actually done. Well, it seems like it. Not fast enough, though, for people who needed that extra stimulus money and are still far away from getting it and may not actually see it until April, right? They may not even be able to see it until April. So that's a problem. Rob says it's not enough, but a start. Yes, it's a start. Only problem is there are people on the Democratic side, as well as everybody on the Republican side, who are opposed to stimulus checks. And the idea of multiple stimulus checks is not one that makes them happy. So there is that. So, well, not until April. If you look at it at what's going on now, they've had the initial reconciliation votes and the vote-a-rama, and the outlines of the bill are passed in both houses of Congress, but now they have debate for a certain period of time, and meanwhile, the impeachment trial, is going to be going on, and looks like that's going to consume most of February. So they're looking at passing this reconciliation bill finally. But they don't think it's finally. They think, Nancy Pelosi thinks she is making a good time if she passes the stimulus bill before what she considers the deadline, which will be something like I think their deadline is March 31st. That's when the unemployment expires. So Nancy Pelosi, I think, is aiming for maybe the first week in March. Then the Senate has to pass something. Then it takes, 6 weeks for the stimulus checks to start to flow. So we're probably looking at about April 15th until the stimulus checks start flowing. Now, they'll be faster for people who have their electronic information into the Treasury. And so maybe some of the checks will begin to get out the first week, in April. But realistically, that's what it's looking like. That was the consequence of going with a reconciliation bill for the stimulus checks. They also could have put up $2,000 stimulus checks, money for shots in a bill. That would have been about $1 trillion bill. and try to pass it through the normal process, and they would have had to get 10 Republican votes. Now, basically, it was a situation of daring the Republicans whether to pass it or not. The Trumpist governor, of West Virginia, was all for the $2,000 checks, and there are probably Trumpists all throughout the country who are all for $2,000 checks because Trump hasn't changed his position on $2,000 checks. So that's it, There's general support in the population for $2,000 checks, but not in the Senate, where the Republicans still have a lot of votes, and then there are the conservative Dems, and so they might not have gotten the 60 votes. I don't think people think they would have gotten the 60 votes. If they thought they could have gotten the 60 votes, they probably would have gone with the checks and shots strategy. So anyway, and Steve pointed out, Steve Gonzo, that Hunter Biden moves his family to a $5.4 million canal front home in Venice. Oh, how nice. And Rob Rivera says, did you hear the beverage governor wants to let corporations run a municipality, small city? This is the craziest fascist policy I've ever heard. He's a Democrat. Who is the beverage governor? I'm sorry, I don't know who the beverage governor is. Oh, Rob says, correction, it's the Nevada governor. Steve Gonzo says, Whitney Webb, smart cities. Evelina says, disgusting. I see. Okay, I'm going to go on to the business of the evening, move on with the main business of the evening, which will be a continuation of this discussion that we've been having of politics and of what the Democrats have really learned. There's a piece by William Rivers Pitt that appeared in Truth Out a few days ago. There's a picture of Biden and Schumer and Kamala Harris and Patrick Leahy. Kamala is, of course, as the vice president, the president of the Senate. That's her official position in the Senate. And Patrick Leahy is the president pro tempore, of the Senate. So when Kamala Harris cannot be there for any reason, he presides over the Senate. Now that can become important because 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans, the president of the Senate or the president pro tempore of the Senate, depending on who's there, gets to cast a deciding vote if there's a party line split. So that's why Senator Patrick Leahy was in on that particular meeting. William Rivers Pitt says a funny thing happened this week. President Biden and the Democratic Party realized they have actual power. Wait, there's more. They don't appear to be afraid of using it. Wait, it gets even better. Seems to me he's getting a little too enthusiastic here. They don't seem to care if Republicans say mean things about him. They're going to do their thing and look out below. After decades of watching Democrats cower before the slashing rhetoric of the Republicans, I wouldn't exactly call it slashing rhetoric. I would call it idiot rhetoric. But anyway, it is an amazing thing to see. In this instance, quote, their thing, unquote, is to seek the passage via reconciliation of another deeply needed COVID relief bill. Republicans coughed up a proposal that was about a third of the size of the current $1.9 trillion package. Mr. Biden thanked them politely, agreed to consider measures to keep relief money from going to people who really don't need it, and then showed them the door. What Pitt is referring to here, of course, is the meeting Joe Biden just had with a Republican delegation of 10. They sent 10 over to imply that they would be able to deliver 10 votes for their package, and maybe you ought to go with their package because maybe the bill could get 60 votes in the Senate. But Biden politely listened and showed them the door. Anyway, the reconciliation is a process by which the 60-vote threshold, made necessary by the inevitable GOP misuse of the filibuster, is set aside. The House has already voted to do this on a straight-line party vote, and the Senate will take the measure up shortly. The Senate has, by the way, taken the measure up and passed the measure, since this article was written on February 4th, and it's now February 6th. Pitt says if reconciliation passes, which it should, Biden and his congressional Democratic allies will need 51 votes to pass the relief package. With the budget resolutions in place, quote unquote, reports the Washington Post, and quote again, Democrats would be able to get to work in earnest on writing Biden's proposed relief bill into law and ultimately pass it without any Republican votes if necessary, though they continue to insist that is not their preference. Passing a hugely expensive bill this way is a significantly muscular move. If it's so muscular, why am I underwhelmed? But anyway, significantly muscular move, says William Rivers Pitt. It signals that all the talk about, quote, unity, unquote, and bipartisanship can take a number. We're getting this damn thing done. Quote, inside the White House, there is a belief that so much of Biden's agenda is tied to the success of the COVID relief package, the most vital of which is containing the spread of coronavirus, that inaction would cripple the presidency and delay would endanger it, reports Politico. Now, before I read anything else, I have to point out that for me, there's already delay. Biden has been in the presidency since January 20th. It's 16 days now, and there's no vote on a bill. Why do we still have the filibuster? Why couldn't it have been arranged with the Democratic senators to get rid of the filibuster, or else? Why couldn't pressure have been put on Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema and John Tester and anybody else who wants to keep the filibuster around to get rid of it, or face the failure of Joe Biden's whole agenda and, of course, the consequent loss of the Senate and the House in 2022 and the likely loss of the presidency in 2024. Now, that would have been a knockdown, drag out. It wouldn't have been fun. It might not have been easy, but I dare say that Manchin and Tester and Sinema would all have folded like the cheap suits they are. Quote, they also view the bill as critical to resolving some of the thornier issues they've constructed in their short time in office. I guess what I'm saying, folks, is I don't think it was very muscular to avoid a bill pushing forward the nuclear option right from the get-go with respect to the filibuster, okay, the legislative filibuster, that is. I don't see why. But going on, Quote, they also view the bill as critical to resolving some of the thorniest issues they've contracted in their short time in office, including school reopenings, which would be accelerated with a massive resource infusion if the relief bill were to pass. So on Wednesday, Biden got more directly involved in the process than he had been at any time prior, unquote. Lurking beneath all the inside baseball talk is the simple fact that the people have been screaming for help for a long, long time. The prone inaction of the former administration, combined with the rigid, no soup for you Republican ideology in the Senate, has made this a bleak, hungry, and terrifying season for millions because dealing with a lurking virus isn't unsettling enough. Being a real American, according to the GOP, must also mean worrying about food and getting thrown out of your apartment. Mr. Biden's stimulus package is wildly unpopular, so of course most Republicans are dead set against it. As a punishment for seeking passage of the bill via reconciliation, the GOP is teeing up what is known as a vote-a-rama, unquote, which again has already taken place. They're through the vote-a-rama. Because they cannot thwart the bill with the filibuster, they will launch a blizzard of amendments to it that will slow down but not stop the process. That's what happened. It slowed down a little bit, but didn't stop it. As of this writing, some 400 amendments have been readied. It's going to be a long night. I said, quote, most Republicans, unquote, and there's the rub. One thing the Biden administration must be permanently aware of is Joe Manchin, the center-right Democratic senator from West Virginia. Manchin has already made a menace of himself regarding the elimination of the filibuster and seemed to be positioning himself to be a log in the road of the relief package. At which point a deeply unexpected twist came along in the plot. West Virginia's very awful governor, Republican Governor Jim Justice, said on Monday, quote, we need to quit counting the egg-sucking legs on the cows and count the cows and just move, unquote. Loosely translated, this means, quote, get out of the way, Joe Manchin, and let this bill pass, unquote. Okay, it also means, I'm going to run against you, Joe Manchin, first chance I have. First chance I have if you don't get out of the way on this. And if you do, I'll probably going to run against you in 2024. Senator Manchin got the message and has signaled his report for the relief package. Beat that with a stick, says William Rivers Pitt. The Republican Party remains an active menace. It took 15 days after Biden's inauguration for Chuck Schumer to wrestle committee control from the clammy grasp of Mitch McConnell. The GOP is an open civil war between a faction represented by the daughter of a notorious war criminal. That, of course, is Liz Cheney, and a faction that is happy to promulgate the belief that pedophile, cannibal lizard people are running the Democratic Party. Evidently, the leading representative of that faction right now is Marjorie Taylor Greene, as I'm sure you all know. Looming over it all is Donald Trump, who is gone, but remains present like a Taco Bell fart in a crowded elevator. That was quite an image, wasn't it? Yet here are Mr. Biden and his congressional allies with actual power in their hands, and more to the point, the actual will to use it. No worries about, quote, you said unity, unquote, fretting on Fox News. No yeah, but, or what about, quote unquote, just the will to get it done. In this right now, they seem very much like, well, Republicans who have no problem whatsoever getting what they came for. Well, maybe that's catching. I don't know. I'm cautiously daring to hope that Democrats are starting to realize that power exists only if you use it. Actually, I don't agree with that. I think that power exists when you have power. You may choose not to use it, in which case you're a fool, okay, as Democrats were in 2009 and 2010, because, if they have the power to use it now, they had twice as much power then. They had 58 senators. But we'll go into that in a little while. But the point is, you can have power and not use that power. Okay, so power doesn't exist only if you use it. It's a disposition. It exists, okay, in the first place. It may only be observable when you view it. That may be true. But it was there for the Democrats in 2009 and 2010, and it's there for the Democrats now. The GOP uses power to start wars, cut taxes, pollute the land, and loot the Treasury. Okay, the Democrats are preparing to use their power to help pull the country out of the tailspin of COVID. At long last, they appear to have remembered how to flex. I assume he means their muscles by that last. Anyway, I sure hope that's true. From his pen to God's ears, right? Anyway. Next, we have a little piece from Ryan Cooper, not quite in the same vein, giving a little bit of counter punch to that, if you will. This isn't from Counterpunch, it's from The Week. But savvy Washington insiders strike again, by Ryan Cooper, sorry. That's from February 5th, just yesterday. Senate Democrats whisked through a budget resolution Friday morning. That's the one we were previously talking about, clearing the way for the $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package proposed by President Biden. The Senate stayed up nearly all night, conducting a vote-a-rama, quote unquote, a part of the reconciliation process that can sidestep the filibuster, in which amendments can be offered by any senator, and eventually pass the resolution on a 51-50 vote, with Vice President Harris breaking the tie. Despite some lamentable amendments, retreats, and odd details that will have to be ironed out, overall, Biden's proposal is an excellent and badly needed bill. It might just keep America ticking over until everyone can be vaccinated. Currently, about 10% of Americans have gotten at least one shot. By the way, it's only, 5 days now until we get our shots. So I guess it's 6 days. So February 12th is when we're due to get it. I believe that's next Friday, if I'm not mistaken. Things are looking kind of good. So right on cue, in step the savvy journalists at Politico and economist Larry Summers, playing some obnoxious DC insider games and doing their best to ruin the country. That's old Larry. Here's the story. Late on Thursday, Summers published a ponderous op-ed in the Washington Post, fretting that maybe the coronavirus relief package, the COVID relief package, I should say, is too big. It might contain so much spending that it will push the economy above its potential full capacity, causing inflation and financial instability, he worried. Then the jokers at Politico's Playbook newsletter, your best source for ill-disguised advertorials and tips on hiding political bribes, repeated his argument. Many, quote, liberal wonks have been whispering about, unquote, Summers' argument for weeks, quote unquote, worrying the package, quote, could harm the economy next year when Democrats will be defending narrow congressional majorities in the midterm, unquote, they write. Politico claimed on Twitter that it was being circulated in the White House as well. Politico tweeted, everyone in the West Wing is reading a Larry Summers op-ed being circulated among liberal policy wonks. Why? Summers put down on paper what many liberal wonks have been whispering about for weeks, that President Biden's stimulus bill may be too big. I guess I have to say, the term liberal policy wonk means something entirely different from what liberal meant during the 1950s and 1960s. The so-called liberal policy wonks, like Larry Summers, are dinos. They're Democrats in name only. They are Republican lights. They are not even as liberal as Richard Nixon was. That's how bad it is today. Jesus. That President Biden's stimulus bill may be too big. And Politico Playbook, Larry Summers plays the skunk at the COVID relief party. Let me first talk about the merits of the argument because they shed light on the motivations here. In brief, these worries about, quote, overshooting, unquote, the stimulus are completely ridiculous. Jobs data released Friday showed the economy is basically stalled out with unemployment at 6.3% and the fraction of prime age workers who are employed 4 points below where it was before the pandemic, just barely above the bottom of the Great Recession. The U.S. is something like 10 million jobs in the hole. Compared to the potential, it's probably 20 million jobs in the hole, maybe 24 million jobs in the hole. How do I know that? Well, I'll defend it some other time, but that's what I think could be done. Moreover, as economist Paul Krugman points out, the pandemic relief package is mostly not stimulus per se. I guess Paul Krugman is not on Larry Summers' side this time, right? It is more aimed at keeping the economy on ice until everyone can be vaccinated. The boost to unemployment insurance in aid to state and local governments, for instance, will partly go unspent if we hit full employment rapidly. Indeed, we may need another round of real stimulus once the vaccines are out. And even if we were somehow to hit full capacity and inflation starts to spike, the Federal Reserve can easily raise interest rates to compensate. A fact Summers bizarrely skates over by limply suggesting they might not do that for some reason. However, this argument about exceeding potential deserves close scrutiny. Summers bases his case on the recent CBO estimate of economic capacity, that is, how much America can produce without causing spiraling inflation. The only problem with the CBO estimate is that, as J.W. Mason and Mike Kongzal argue in detail at the Roosevelt Institute, it is worthless garbage. For one thing, it is impossible to know for sure where full capacity might be when it is far off. It is much wiser to simply stimulate until we see full capacity. For another, the CBO estimate of what full employment looks like is based on the labor market in 2005 adjusted for democratic changes. There is no justification whatever for using this year instead of 2000 or 1967 or 1964 or 1944, I should say, or any other year. Let's use 1944. That's the year when we had real full employment. Indeed, at 2013 IMF conference, one famous economist argued convincingly that the mid-2000s was definitely not a full employment period. I take that back. It wasn't really full employment because it wasn't expected at that point that women would necessarily be in the workforce, which today they are. So in other words, the workforce as a percentage of total population was higher probably in the year 2000 than it ever has been. But anyway, going on. Indeed, at a 2013 IMF conference, one famous economist argued convincingly that the mid-2000s was not a full employment period, definitely not a full employment period, despite the huge housing bubble juicing up spending. Catch this, folks. If you go back and you study the economy prior to the 2008 financial crisis, there's something a little bit odd. Many people believe that monetary policy was too easy. Everybody agrees that there was a vast amount of imprudent lending going on. Almost everybody believes that wealth as it was experienced by households was in excess of its reality. Was there a great boom? A capacity by utilization wasn't under any great pressure. Unemployment wasn't under any remarkably low level. Inflation was entirely quiescent. So somehow, even a great bubble wasn't enough to produce any excess in aggregate demand. This was a statement from the IMF. That economist was named Larry Summers. Uh-oh. This weak argument and jarring inconsistency, says Ryan Cooper, shows this discussion has little to do with economics. This is about political jockeying for influence and the warped culture of DC journalism. Summers has been frozen out of a job in the Biden administration, and so he is characteristically trying to elbow into the conversation by writing articles about how everyone but him is wrong. In keeping with his prior history as a neoliberal ideologue, that's it, a neoliberal ideologue, Summers was previously best known for bullying a deputy, Christina Romer, into lowballing the size of Obama's Recovery Act and preventing the regulation of dangerous financial derivatives. He's worrying about inflation at the worst possible time. Then the playbook goofballs, the ones at Politico, who cover life and death political questions as amusing palace intrigue, then gleefully stoke the flames by credulously covering his argument and apparently exaggerating his influence among, quote, liberal wonks, unquote, who dismissed his argument out of hand and among the Biden team. White House sources quickly denied the playbook account, and longtime Biden economic advisor Jared Bernstein made the TV rounds lambasting Summers' argument. Very often, when one reads anonymously sourced Beltway journalism about how somebody is being read in high places or considered for an important job, the source is the very person in question. At any rate, the stakes for real life here are not small. The single worst thing Biden could do for his party's prospects in the 2022 midterm elections would be to undershoot the recovery. But with any less, this will simply be an annoying footnote to history and perhaps a lesson not to read playbook even for insider tips, because it's not too good at getting us insider tips. Now here's another extremely illuminating piece, which I will provide some disagreement and some commentary and some history about. This one is by Ryan Grim of The Intercept. And Ryan is often good on DC Insider things. He's the head of the DC group at The Intercept. And he says in his headline, this is on February 3rd, Democrats actually learned from the failures of 2000. And the subtitle is, "The process around the 2009 stimulus and Obamacare was such a mess. Not even Joe Biden wants to relive it." Let's hope this is true. Let's hope it's true. And there's a picture of Susan Collins on February 10th, 2009. With all kinds of people surrounding her. Anyway, on Wednesday, Senator Joe Manchin appeared on MSNBC's Morning Joe, talk about the state of negotiations over President Joe Biden's COVID-19 relief package. By the network, posted the video with the misleading headline, quote, "Senator Manchin calls for bipartisanship on COVID relief plan," unquote. The headline isn't technically inaccurate. Manchin did profess a desire for Republicans to have an opportunity to shape the coming legislation, saying that he would oppose efforts to abolish the filibuster. Quote, "I've been in the minority when they're jammed. It's not the way this place is supposed to work," unquote, he said. But the real message Manchin delivered was a different one. He had recently spoken to Biden about the path forward, he said, and Biden was quite clear. He basically said, "I don't want to go down the path we went down in 2009 when we negotiated for 8 months and still didn't have a product and had to do what we're doing now." Because that's when they started on reconciliation after they were negotiating for 8 months on healthcare reform. Okay, they negotiated for 8 months on that. They would think it was more than 8 months. And they didn't have a product. And the bill would have died, except that Nancy Pelosi went ahead with reconciliation at that point and produced the giveaway to the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies and the providers, now known as the Affordable Care Act. Quote, "Fine, Mr. President, I'm happy to start this process," said Joe Manchin. The process he was referring to is budget reconciliation, the parliamentary avenue through which specific kinds of legislation can travel with a simple majority vote avoiding the filibuster. And the reasoning behind it, that we can't make the same mistake as in 2009, marks a startling departure from the Democratic Party's long-run inability to learn from failure. Such a take on that year's Democratic legislative strategy would have found broad support among the most progressive elements of the party in years past. But to see it endorsed by Manchin and Biden effectively makes the assessment unanimous from left to right, arguably the most united the party has been since it was founded. It was founded in the run-up to the election of 1828. So that's a very bold statement by Ryan. By Ryan Grim. I'm not sure that's exactly true. I think the party was probably pretty united in 1933 when Roosevelt came into office. I think he united them pretty damn fast. The 2009 to 10 term was so traumatizing to Democrats who lived through it that many, including Biden in his conversation with Manchin, have collapsed the staggering varieties of Republican obstruction of a broad range of Democratic priorities, from the stimulus to Obamacare to judicial nominations to Wall Street reform into one dark memory of an experience never to be repeated. The 2016 presidential campaign of Bernie Sanders ushered in a new generation to Democratic politics, many of whom experienced the consequences of 2008 financial crisis and the failure to respond to it adequately, but weren't following the day-to-day congressional drama that actually produced it. And now Ryan will start talking about this because he was following the day-to-day congressional drama that produced it, and so was I. Those new to politics may be lucky enough to not even know the name Max Baucus. To those who lived through that year plus on Capitol Hill, his apparition is enough to spike blood pressure to dangerous levels. For me, it's not just Max Baucus whose apparition is enough to spike my blood pressure to dangerous levels. It's Barack Obama, who worked hand in glove with Max Baucus during all that period of time, who couldn't get enough of Max Baucus. Democrats entered the 2009 congressional term with 58 members of their Senate caucus. Tantalizingly, and it would turn out debilitatingly close to the 60 needed to end the GOP filibuster. Now, my first correction to Ryan Grim, 60 votes was not necessary to end a GOP filibuster. 51 votes was necessary to end the GOP filibusters for good. All the filibusters, only 51 votes would be needed. In fact, only 50 votes, plus the vote of the vice president was needed to end filibusters. The truth is, the Democrats didn't even try to end the filibusters with the nuclear option. If they had tried it, or even threatened to go with the nuclear option, and started procedures to go with the nuclear option, the Republicans would have folded. Enough Republicans would have come over to have passed all the priorities of the Democrats. With 58 senators anyway, they could give away 8 senators, 8 Max Baucuses, 8 Joe Liebermans, 8 of the bunch of other turds that were in the Senate on the Democratic side at that time. They could have given away 8 of them easily, and they still could have gotten rid of the filibuster. Even if Bobby Soxer wanted to go over to the other side, she could have. That's my nickname for Barbara Boxer, who was in the Senate at that time. Along with Di-Fi, they both could have gone over to the other side. Al Franken, on April 28th of 2009, so I had to point that out. Ryan here is just gliding on by the idea that the Dems did not sell out in the first place by failing to end the filibuster in 2009, which is the first damn thing they should have done before they took over. And by the way, remember we just were talking about the stimulus bill? I guess we're going to be talking about it here. But we'll get into the stimulus bill, the 2009 stimulus bill, and what they could have done at that point. But anyway, the first sort of distortion of Ryan's or misstatement of Ryan's is failing to point out that they didn't move to get rid of the filibuster at the beginning. That's why they needed 60 votes, because they were, in the beginning, didn't want to sacrifice the filibuster. They didn't want to impose party discipline to get rid of the filibuster. Anyway, on April 28th, 2009, Senator Arlen Specter switched to the Democratic Party because he couldn't stand the Republicans anymore and their obstruction, because he was a sincere centrist who wanted to cooperate on certain things, okay, with the Democrats. So he switched, okay, at the time, okay, I wrote a blog post when he switched. It was called "Free at Last, Free at Last." Hallelujah, he's free at last. Anyway, Al Franken had defeated incumbent Norm Coleman in Minnesota, but was not sworn in right away. I think he defeated Norm Coleman in an election in January or something. Or maybe it was March, I'm not sure. Anyway, Republicans cleverly litigated the election, dragging the recount out for months, knowing that each day Franken was kept from the upper chamber was worth the price of the legal costs. Now, keep in mind, they cleverly litigated it, and they dragged it out for all this time, okay? In part because the Democrats did not do everything they could to speed up that particular recount. They just kind of let things go. Anyway, on July 7, 2009, Franken finally became a senator, giving the party 60 votes. But Teddy Kennedy died 6 weeks later. On February 4th of 2000, 6 weeks later, he died, as I recall, the last week in August, or close to the last week in August of 2009. On February 4th, 2010, Scott Brown was sworn in as a Republican from the state of Massachusetts, ending the party's supermajority. Yes. So that means, the Democrats had September, October, November, December, and part of January when they had a supermajority. What did they do with the supermajority? Did they do anything with the supermajority? Did they ram through a public option with the supermajority, which they could have done at that time? Did they get rid of the filibuster with a supermajority? Did they pass a reconciliation bill before February 4th of 2010? Did they pass a bigger stimulus? Which by then it was quite clear the original stimulus wasn't going to be enough. Why didn't they come back in September and pass a super stimulus then to get us out of the recession? Why not? Why couldn't they do that then? Scott Brown wasn't in there till February 4th. After he beat Martha Coakley. Why did Scott Brown beat Martha Coakley in that election? I'll tell you why. Because the Obama administration and the Democrats were feckless. Feckless. They didn't pass anything after the stimulus bill to improve the condition of the American people. The FinReg bill was a piece of crap. They passed that in the early fall. It had things in it that wouldn't have stopped the crash of 2008, which was the supposed purpose of getting a FinReg bill anyway. They passed a credit card regulation bill in the spring that gave the corporations all kinds of time to adjust to it and didn't control interest rates so that the credit card companies came out of that particular bill still able to charge us 20%, 24%, 28%. They did nothing for people with that bill. How popular would they have been if they had restricted credit card interest to 6 points over prime? Isn't 6 points over prime enough? Sure it is. Sure it is. Maybe it should have been 6 points over the federal funds rate. Maybe even 4 points over the federal funds rate. No, the Democrats allowed the usury on credit cards to continue to go on when they had not just a majority in the Congress of 58-42, but when they had a majority of 60-40, they allowed that to go on. The first order of business in 2009, as it is in 2021, 12 years later, a lost decade, was a stimulus package to get the economy, losing jobs by the millions, back on its feet. Obama, in his new memoir, quote, A Promised Land, unquote, describes the pivotal meeting during the transition in which the wings were clipped off of it being the stimulus bill. Incoming White House economic advisor, that is one of the council of economic advisors, Christina Romer, suggested a stimulus. I think she was the chairperson, if I'm not mistaken, of the Council of Economic Advisors back then, suggested a stimulus in the $1 trillion range. No, Ryan, she suggested a stimulus in the $1.8 trillion range. But Obama never even heard that, because Larry Summers clipped the wings on that before Romer even got a chance to suggest something in the $1 trillion range. Then there was this meeting in the White House. And quote from Obama's book, "There's no fucking way," unquote. Obama recalls his chief of staff, by Rahm Emanuel, suggesting something in the $700 billion range instead. $700 billion versus Christina Romer's $1.8 trillion. Rahm Emanuel coming in with just a little more than a third of what Christina Romer suggested. Nowhere does Ryan say that or describe that. From then on, insider politics drove the number that Democrats would push for. Now, whose fault is that? Whose fault is it that insider politics drove the number that Democrats would push for? Was it Rahm Emanuel's fault? I mean, Rahm Emanuel wasn't the president of the United States. He was just some little twerp hired by the president of the United States. This quote, "There's no fucking way," was from Rahm Emanuel, but it was almost as if Obama said it himself. What was Obama? Some passive character inside of the White House who had no freedom to ask Christina Romer what she really thought was needed from an economics point of view? From then on, insider politics drove the number that Democrats would push for. Early February, Senator Ben Nelson, who's Democrat, of Nebraska, said that he expected the final package to be below $800 billion, claiming that, quote, "as an economic matter," unquote, "it ought not to be too robust." Quote, for me, it's not symbolism. It's an economic matter. At some point, it's just too big, unquote, he said. I asked him, said Ryan, oh, yes, I think it was Ryan who asked him this, if he felt that 800 billion was the point at which economists believe it was too large. And he replied by saying, quote, it's whatever gets 60 votes. 61 votes, he said, smiling, acknowledging that economics had nothing to do with it. So look, the Democrats did not even have to get rid of the filibuster to pass a stimulus bill that would have taken us out of the recession within 6 months. All they had to do was pass a reconciliation bill then. They would have needed only 50 votes plus the vote of Joe Biden to get a reconciliation bill passed at that time. Judging from the speed at which this one is going to be available for passage, it wouldn't have taken more than 3 weeks to a month. They had no intervening impeachment trial then. That was the sole, most high priority business on their plate. They could have passed that reconciliation bill in 3 weeks. As it was, they passed the ARRA, if I remember, by the first week in February. So if it had been a reconciliation bill, it would have passed by the third week in February. Fine. It could have been that $1.8 trillion bill, and the Republicans and the conservative Dems wouldn't have been able to do a damn thing about it. If Ben Nelson didn't like it, he could go stuff it. But Obama wouldn't do that. That's why Obama raises my blood pressure so much. Emmanuel's prognostication had become self-fulfilling. And Nelson, along with a few Republicans willing to negotiate, knew they held the cards. Budget reconciliation was available to Democrats, but they had chosen not to use it. In talks with Senators Specter, Olympia Snowe, and Susan Collins, the proposal was whittled down, with Collins arbitrarily insisting no funds for school construction or upgrades be included. She wouldn't support education, so that was cut. The resulting $787 billion package was woefully small, leaving unemployment hovering at 10% by November 2010. And already millions angry at the Obama administration. Not only about that, but angry because they had done nothing about health care reform. No, I'm sorry, by November 2010, they had passed the Affordable Care Act. They had. But everybody was mad at them about that. It wasn't popular at that time, if you recall. Everybody hated it. They thought that what the Democrats had done was to labor mightily over a year and 3-month period and bring forth a mouse. Obama had known 2 years earlier that if the economy was still struggling, his party would pay the price. 2 years before November 2010 was November 2008. He knew in November 2008. Yet his team had come up short. His team had come up short. Who had come up short? He had come up short. Going on with the article. Leaving that transition meeting, David Axelrod, a close advisor, told him, quote, it's going to be one hell of a midterm, unquote, shaking his head. Obama writes in his memoir, quote, this time I said nothing, admiring his occasional, almost endearing ability to state the obvious. unquote. But he didn't state the obvious. Obama, he didn't state the obvious. The obvious is that you were the failure. You are the person who allowed that bill to remain too small. You were the person who allowed the Medicare, the healthcare reform bill to be a failure. You were the person who allowed the credit card reform bill to be a failure. You were the person who allowed the FinReg bill to be a failure. In the end, Specter, still a Republican, joined Snowe and Collins in voting for the rescue package on the Senate floor in February. It came at the cost of paring it down severely and extending the pain of the recession. Though the economy eventually began growing slowly, millions were left out of work, and voters threw Democrats out of the House in 2010 and the Senate in 2014. The recovery plodded along. Quote, 10 years it took because it wasn't deep enough and strong enough, unquote, said Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to Rachel Maddow in a recent interview. Quote, 10 years. We're not going to make that mistake with COVID, unquote. So Schumer knows. In the same interview, Schumer blasted his party's approach to the Affordable Care Act. Look at 2009, when we spent a year and a half trying to get something good done. The ACA, Obamacare, and we didn't do all the other things that had to be done. We will not repeat that mistake, quote unquote, he said. Quote, we will not repeat that mistake. That is a revelation to me. I never knew Schumer felt that way. He's been trying to hide his disappointment with Obama and the Obama administration for 10 years now. He never said anything like that in 2009. He never said anything like that in 2010. Maybe if he had, and if the damn Democrats had not been feeding the Obama legend from 2009 through 2016, and they had run much more aggressively over the latter years of the Obama administration, maybe we wouldn't have had any Donald Trump at all. So he knew. Schumer knew from the start. They all knew. But they wouldn't talk about it. See no evil. Hear no evil. Speak no evil. A party of monkeys. Jeff Stein of the Washington Post says, Schumer today, after leaving the White House, there's apparent universal agreement. We must go big, bold. A picture of Franklin Roosevelt was hovering all of us, and we're very much aware of that. It was alluded to a whole bunch of times. And Seung Min Kim tweeted, hello, gang. Schumer says Dems are united as one for a big, bold package, working with our Republican friends when we can. What Republican friends? Anyway. Republicans in the Senate have countered by suggesting Democrats lop off more than two-thirds of their proposal, bringing it down to $600 billion. That's an offer the Democratic Party would have taken seriously. This time around, Montana Senator Jon Tester, one of the handful of red state Democrats still remaining, told CNN he was fine with the price tag. Quote, I don't think $1.9 trillion, even though it is a boatload of money, is too much money. I think now is not the time to starve the economy, unquote, he said. Quote, if it's $1.9 trillion, so be it, Manchin told a nonplussed Mika Brzezinski. I guess on Morning Joe. Max Baucus, a Democrat from Montana, was chair of the Senate Finance Committee in 2009, which, given its role in revenue policy, took the lead in drafting the Affordable Care Act. Baucus's longtime lieutenant, But Jim, but Messina, meanwhile, had gone to the White House as Emanuel's deputy chief of staff. As Messina sat down to cut deals with the major stakeholders in the healthcare industry, big pharma, hospitals, medical device makers, and insurance companies, Baucus zeroed in on what he considered to be the three most likely Republicans to back what would eventually be known as Obamacare. Senators Chuck Grassley of Iowa, Mike Enzi, Wyoming, and Olympia Snowe of Maine. In the spring, together with Democrats Jeff Bingaman of New Mexico and Ken Conrad, of North Dakota. Boy, that Ken Conrad, what a bozo. They formed the so-called Gang of Six, a half-dozen finance committee members who met on a regular basis, but to negotiate the bill, collectively representing a population of less than 10 million, along with much of the congressional press corps. I spent countless hours standing outside the meeting room they commandeered in the Hart Senate office building, collecting tidbits on their crawling backroom talks. Let's pause to consider what's become of these lead Obamacare architects since. Jim Messina became a political and corporate consultant, working for the Tories in the UK as part of the team that advised former Prime Minister David Cameron to put Brexit up for a vote because it would surely lose. What could go wrong? From there, he helped run the, quote, yes, unquote, campaign for the Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi on a referendum on a major parliamentary reorganization. Renzi lost in a landslide, and like Cameron, he resigned. And Jim Messina was then hired by new UK Prime Minister Theresa May's re-election campaign. Another disaster. Quote, but Jim Messina is perhaps the world's most successful political and corporate advisor, unquote, reads his bio at the Messina Group, but declining to mention his role in blowing up the United Kingdom. Baucus, meanwhile, did not run for re-election in 2014 and was named ambassador to China by Obama. In one of the most startling jaunts through the revolving door in world history, he followed that by joining the board of the Chinese behemoth Alibaba. But back to the Hart hallway. That's the hallway of the Hart Senate office building. With each passing day, Baucus, Snowe, and others would emerge to talk about the genuine progress they were making and their hope for a light at the end of the tunnel. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid of Nevada and White House advisors had warned Obama they weren't serious and were just stalling for time. How many times did I write articles at that time attacking Harry Reid for not ending the filibuster? I must have had 5 articles on that damn subject during this period of time when Harry Reid was being feckless himself about the filibuster. He now says the filibuster has to go. Where was that Harry Reid in 2009 and 2010? Quote, but we decided it was best to let Baucus's process play itself out, unquote. Obama writes in his memoir, quote, during an Oval Office meeting, though, I made a point of warning him not to let Grassley string him along, unquote. Quote, trust me, Mr. President, unquote. Obama recalls Baucus saying, quote, Chuck and I have already discussed it. We're going to have this thing done by July. That, folks, was July of 2009, not July of 2010. By July, The House had indeed passed health care reform through each of its relevant committees, but the heart meetings dragged on. Quote, no matter how hard we pressed, though, we couldn't get Baucus to complete his work, Obama writes. Why not? Well, because Baucus didn't want no stinking public option. We knew that from the beginning. He didn't want no stinking public option. But there were Democratic senators who did want one. So what was the holdup? Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell had been instructing his soldiers to drag out the talks so long as possible in hopes of killing the whole thing and bringing Obama down with it. Quote, if we're able to stop Obama on this, it will be his Waterloo. It will break him, unquote, said South Carolina Senator Jim DeMint in July, who went on to lead the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank. In a way, it was Obama's Waterloo. Of course, he got elected in 2012, and he served for 4 more years. But on the domestic front, Democrats were getting killed during those years. And the Affordable Care Act never became really popular. It was always a touch and go thing. And the failures of Obama led directly to the failures of his former Secretary of State, one Hillary Rodham Clinton, and of course to the election of the fascist Donald Trump. Obama called Baucus to the White House in late July. And said, quote, time's up, Max, unquote, Obama says he told him. Quote, you've given it your best shot. Grassley's gone. He just hasn't broken the news to you yet, unquote. Quote, I respectfully disagree, Mr. President. I know Chuck. I think we're this close to getting him, he added. Oh, by the way, folks, Chuck is still there, still blocking any progress, holding his finger and thumb an inch apart, asking to give him through the summer recess to keep working. Quote, one part of me wanted to get up, grab Baucus by the shoulders, and shake him till he came to his senses, unquote, Obama writes. Quote, I decided that this won't work, unquote. Obama gave him until mid-September. What does he mean, this won't work? If it won't work, then why didn't he go to Harry Reid and tell Harry Reid, look, Harry, the filibuster has got to go. We can pass something with 50 votes and with the deciding vote cast by the vice president. Here's the bill that I want. Nuke the filibuster for me. Let's get this done. Instead, he gave Baucus until mid-September. But he could have done that in July. Hell, he could have done that in January, before he got into the presidency, and there would have been no filibuster to contend with, and a majority of 58 to 42 in the early days of his administration in the Senate. And Pelosi had complete and total control of the House at that point. 240 some odd Democrats in the House. Big, big margin. She could have done what she wanted. She could have railroaded a Medicare for All bill if she wanted. So lawmakers went home. At an Iowa town hall, Grassley, still an active member of the Gang of Six, trashed it, giving credence to the burgeoning conspiracy theory that government-run, quote, death panels, unquote, were part of the bill. Quote, "You have every right to fear," unquote, he said at the town hall, adding that, quote, "We should not have a government-run plan to decide when to pull the plug on grandma," unquote. When, of course, the private insurers were already pulling the plug on grandma. That was my commentary, of course. Obama called both Baucus and Grassley into the Oval Office. Grassley, Obama recalled, listed 5 objections to the bill. Let me ask you a question, Chuck. If Max took every one of your latest suggestions, could you support the bill? Unquote. Quote, "Well," said Grassley, and quote again, "Are there any changes, any at all, that would get us your vote?" Unquote. Obama describes an awkward silence before, quote, Grassley looked up and met my gaze, unquote. Quote, "I guess not, Mr. President," unquote, Grassley said. In September, now several weeks past Obama's deadline, Enzi, another charter member of the gang, told an angry Wyoming town hall he was only in the talks in order to stall it. Quote, "If I hadn't been involved in this process as long as I have, came to the death I have, you would already have national health care," unquote, he said. Finally, in mid-October, that was in September, the damn bill didn't pass until March. And it was a terrible bill. Of course, you only know that if you had in your head a vision of what had been a good bill. There was a good bill introduced into the Congress at that time. It was H.R. 676, John Conyers' Medicare for All bill. Why isn't that mentioned here by Ryan? Finally, in mid-October, after 3 weeks of public hearings and amendments, the whittled-down bill came up for a vote in the Senate Finance Committee. Snowe voted for it, giving Obama and Baucus the bipartisan victory they had been searching for. When it finally came to the floor on December 24th, she voted no, along with every other Senate Republican. McConnell had gotten her back in line. Then came Scott Brown's win on January 19, 2010. Democrats ended up finishing the legislation using the reconciliation process. Obama signed it into law on March 23, 2010. So that bill would appear to cost less money. In its 10-year Congressional Budget Office analysis, however, most of the benefits were delayed. So on the one hand, voters were warned the bill would kill grandma, that it would mean long wait times and ration care, and they were frustrated by more than a year of dysfunction. And on the other hand, they had nothing to balance the ledger, feeling none of the upside for several years. Republicans immediately went to the Supreme Court in an effort to have it declared unconstitutional. And that's not all. What Ryan doesn't say is that the benefits were delayed until 2014, except for 1 or 2 relatively small benefits, but the taxes started in 2010. Paying for it started in 2010. The idiots passed a bill that they would pay for 4 years before the benefits of the bill became fully effective. You wonder why the Democrats lost in November 2010? Who is stupid enough to do that? For some reason, Democrats would rather try a different route this time around. On Morning Joe, Manchin suggested a lawmaking process so reasonable that for Senate Democrats, it's downright radical. Quote, "If they want to be reasonable and they want to participate, then we work with them," said Joe Manchin of his GOP colleagues. Quote, "Let's see if they have an amendment, a reasonable amendment, if they have something zeroed," unquote, fully stripped from the package. Quote, "It gets no votes. Then the Democrats vote and we move on," unquote. A legislative body debating an issue, voting, and allowing that vote to determine the outcome. It's so crazy, it just might work, says Ryan. And that was it for Ryan Grimm's piece. At some levels, okay, it's excellent, but he just refused to point out all the flaws of the Obama administration, the active role Obama took in blocking reform all through 2009 by basically being passive and leaving it in the hands of someone who was basically a lobbyist for the insurance companies, specifically Max Baucus. His mistress at the time was an actual lobbyist for the insurance company who wrote large portions of that absolutely huge bill. If I recall correctly, the Obamacare bill eventually was a 2,300-page bill written in substantial part by Max Baucus's mistress. Or maybe Max Baucus was her mistress. I'm not sure. Anyway, one more. This one pretty short. This is a piece also by Ryan Grim, but it's about stuff that Jeff Merkley had to say. This was on February 5th. Dem Senator warns, it's also from The Intercept, if the party wants to lose Georgia, break the promise made in the runoff. There's a picture of Jeff Merkley, the junior senator from the state of Oregon. Democrats risk throwing away a Senate Georgia race in 2 years if they go back on their promise, to deliver direct aid after campaigning on the issue. And if they throw that Senate seat away, by the way, they're likely to lose control of the Senate, because the same trends that will defeat the Georgia senator will defeat other senatorial candidates. Why? Because the Democrats will have shown they're not able to deliver on their promises. Anyway, the Democratic closing argument in the pivotal Georgia Senate runoffs, which elected Senators Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, was that they would approve $2,000 of direct aid blocked by Senator Mitch McConnell, by Republican Kentucky, if they took control of the Senate. But Democrats are now floating the idea that millions of people promised those checks should not actually get them, arguing that the relief should be more narrowly targeted to those who earned less than $50,000 on their latest tax returns. The President, Joe Biden, has since confirmed that he's open to the move. Quote, "We need to target the money so folks making $300,000 don't get any windfall," unquote, Biden said Friday. And quote again, quote, if you're a family that's a two-wage earner, each of the parents, one making 30 grand, one making 40 or 50, maybe that's a little more than, well, yeah, they need the money and they're going to get it. And here's what I won't do. That sentence is almost incoherent. I'm not cutting the size of the checks. They're going to be $1,400, period. You promised in Georgia explicitly $2,000 checks, not $1,400 checks. Warnock ran on $2,000 checks. There's a poster with a check that says $2,000 on it from the Treasury Department. Biden, quote, floated this trial balloon about changing the targeted audience for the direct payments, unquote. Said Jeff Merkley in an interview for the Intercept's podcast, Deconstructed, quote, "I would advise him, if he were to ask me, that's not the place to compromise. That if you want to see us lose a Senate race in Georgia in 2 years, then modify the promise made. Break the promise made during the Georgia runoff. The first chunk of the stimulus check, 600, that went out in late December and early January, was targeted to individuals who earned $75,000 or less, or married couples filing jointly who earned up to $150,000 on their 2019 returns, with the payment gradually tapering off for those who are earning more. The new proposal would begin the tapering at $50,000 instead, cutting off potentially half of those who got the first piece of the $2,000. Restricting the payments would mean that millions of people promised the aid, if Democrats won, would be left stiff. Yes, because Biden changed the promise. It was implicit. It hasn't changed it yet, but it was implicit that the same criteria would be used for the $2,000 checks that would be used for the earlier $600 checks. You can't change the ground rules now in midstream because you got some goddamn wonks in your administration who think that might be a good idea for unknown reasons they're willing to say out loud to the public because they know it would be tremendously unpopular. Restricting the payments would mean that millions of people promised the aid if Democrats won would be left stiff. Some compromises around the edges of the $1.9 trillion stimulus are fine, Merkley said, but breaking such a high-profile promise would be a unique betrayal. There's a lot in that bill where you could argue a little more here or less there, but I think when you have made that a central point of a key election and narrowly won that election, we all together better deliver on that promise, unquote. Seems like common sense to me. At a rally ahead of runoffs, Biden directly connected the elections to the forthcoming aid. Quote, by electing John and the Reverend, you can make an immediate difference in your own lives and the lives of the people all across this country, because their election will put an end to the block in Washington on that $2,000 stimulus check, that money that will go out the door immediately, unquote. And quote again, if you send Senator Perdue and Loeffler back to Washington, those checks will never get there. It's just that simple. The power is literally in your hands, unquote. He was passionate about the stakes, says Ryan. Quote again, okay, the debate over 2000 isn't some abstract debate in Washington. It's about real lives, your lives, the lives of good, hardworking Americans. And if you're like millions of Americans all over the country, you need the money, you need the help, and you need it now. Look, Georgia, there's no one in America with more money to make that happen than you, with more power to make that happen than you, The citizens of Atlanta, the citizens of Georgia, unquote, he said. It made for a powerful moment and could make for an even more powerful campaign ad against Senator Raphael Warnock when he runs for re-election to a full term in 2022, which is a race that has effectively already started. Warnock won a special election to fill out the term of Republican Senator Johnny Isakson, who retired after being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. That term runs through 2022. The direct aid is part of a stimulus package now being moved through the Senate budget by reconciliation process. The package also includes aid to state and local governments, money for vaccine distribution, expanded unemployment benefits, and subsidies for health care coverage. On Thursday, the Senate held a series of non-binding votes on amendments to the budget resolution. Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia, has been a leading advocate of tightening eligibility for the aid, filed a vague amendment that passed with an overwhelming majority. The amendment does the political work that Manchin wants it to do, putting Democrats on record against giving handouts to the wealthy, but it doesn't get specific. It allows the chair of the Senate Budget Committee to, quote, revise the allocations relating to targeting economic impact payments to Americans who are suffering from the effects of COVID-19, including provisions to ensure upper income taxpayers are not included by the amounts provided in such legislation for those purposes, unquote. The amendment stipulates that the committee chair, Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, has the discretion to decrease but not increase the scope of who gets the payments. So in other words, it's possible for Bernie to block any changes to the eligibility criteria. Even if Biden wants changes, it's possible for Bernie, as the committee chair, to stop this. Sanders voted yes on Manchin's amendment, but specifies he does not support lowering the threshold. So the legislation will first be written by the Senate Finance Committee, chaired by Merkley's home state colleague, Senator Ron Wyden, before being sent to the Budget Committee. If the Finance Committee sends Sanders a bill dictating a lower threshold, his hands would be partially tied, though not entirely, as the chair retains discretion in spite of the non-binding amendments. So his hands aren't tied. In other words, the amendment by Joe Manchin was a non-binding amendment. So if the Finance Committee sends a bill dictating a lower threshold based on the non-binding amendment, then Bernie, I believe, could change that. The political problem for Democrats who want to go cheap on the payments is compounded by the way the $2,000 is being paid out. In December, Congress approved $608, though former President Donald Trump threatened to veto it, saying it would be $2,000 instead. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez quickly filed an amendment to add $1,400 to the already approved $600 payments, and it was passed by the House. Senator McConnell, then the majority of the Senate, blocked the amendment in a blunder that likely cost him control of the upper chamber. In Georgia, Democrats ran on the promise of getting that $2,000 check out the door immediately if they won both Senate races. But even after the $600 check had been sent out, Democrats continued to refer to a $2,000 check, leading some of the progressives in Congress to argue that Biden should now approve a full $2,000 for a total of $2,600. But from a political standpoint, if tens of millions of people get $1,400 checks, Democrats are still well positioned to benefit from having delivered on Ocasio-Cortez's amendment. But if tens of millions who get got 600 from Trump, get stiffed by Biden on the remainder, while watching millions of others get their checks, the damage could be severe enough to cost Democrats the Senate. I believe that paragraph is very important. It puts the case that's going to be put in ads if the Democrats change the eligibility criteria. From a political standpoint, if tens of millions of people get $1,400 checks, Democrats are still well positioned to benefit from having delivered on Ocasio-Cortez's amendment. I don't know if I agree with that part of it. I still think Democrats are going to suffer some for not having delivered fully on the Georgia promise. But then, in the next sentence, I think he's putting the case well. But if tens of millions who got 600 from Trump get stiffed by Biden on the remainder while watching millions of others get their checks, the damage could be severe enough to cost Democrats to Senate. Yes, it could be, because that could sour millions of people on Democrats for failing to keep their promises. And they could turn again to the people waiting to capitalize on that, just waiting. Democrats control 50 seats, with Vice President Harris acting as a tiebreaker, meaning they can't afford to lose any to retain control of the chamber. Out of nearly 4.5 million votes cast in the Georgia runoff, Warnock won by just 93,272. And remember yesterday's column, I think this was in Ryan Cooper's column yesterday. Okay, or maybe it was in Dave Dayen's column yesterday. Okay, I forget which. It would cost $45 billion additional to send $2,000 checks to everyone. Is that what he said? I think I want to pull that up to make sure that I have that right. I'm going to double check on that because it's important. Okay, I think it came, where did it come from? Let me see. Hang on just a second, and I'll be able to get that. Of course, it'll take more than a second. It's just the way these things are, but it won't take too long. I'll try Dave Dayen first, because I think I recall his quoting some people from the Heritage Foundation about that. Yeah, that's it. From Dave Dayen. And the question about that is why? Who is this for? Mark Goldwine of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates. Yeah, it was the creepy Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget Estimates. The one that's headed by Maya McGinnis, who is the protege of the late Peter G. Peterson, that the more tightly targeted checks would cost $420 billion as opposed to $45 billion. So if they stick with the eligibility rules that they had for the $600 payments, it would cost them $45 billion more out of a $1.9 trillion package. Does it make any sense at all to listen to the people who want to change those eligibility criterion so they can say that the relatively few people who maybe make $300,000 but got some help that they did not actually deserve? We're talking about very small numbers here. Very small numbers of people. It's just basically a propaganda point. Nobody really cares about the $45 billion in a $1.9 trillion bill. They just don't want the Republicans to be able to say in ads, these Democrats helped the rich people with their stimulus payments because the eligibility criteria were too loose. So, here's the choice for you. There's that ad which the Republicans can take, against the Democrats. Or here's another ad. Here's another ad. You screwed millions of people in the middle class by not giving them stimulus checks because you tightened up the eligibility criteria. Well, you smart asses, which ad is worse for you? Which ad is worse for you, Joe Manchin? When Jim Justice runs against you, which ad will be worse for you? Sorry. I can't get over what schmucks some of these people are. Really schmucks. I mean, I don't care if they're for their donors. I mean, they should have a basic sense of the politics of the matter. I mean, you can please your donors without being just plain stupid, you know? So, I'm getting to your comments now. Kay says, the more I learn about actual government processes still used in this country, the more backwards I realize we are. Shake my head and corrupt. That's right. Steve Gonzo says, plane, train, bus passengers without masks now face fines up to $1,500. And there's a link to that at Yahoo. And Steve Gonzo says, hashtag Israel PM at Netanyahu on International Criminal Court decision, quote, when ICC investigates Israel for fake war crimes, this is pure anti-Semitism. The court established to prevent atrocities like the Nazi Holocaust is now targeting the one state of the Jewish people. I wish that guy would. Never mind. He needs to. STFU, which Kay Clark Ryan says Larry Summers needs to STFU. So does Netanyahu need to STFU. He needs to get the hell out of there. Steve Gonzo says, at Baranya Kalik, at this point, I'm surprised, the Likudniks haven't labeled Palestinians having babies as an act of anti-Semitism. Kay says, that place is a total mess. Even Jews are protesting every day about it. Even Jews? Jews have been protesting about it for years and years and years. It was long ago that a majority of Jews shifted over to the side of recognizing that Palestinians have human rights. It's just a small minority of Jews with a lot of money that still back the Likudniks. Steve Wolfbrand says, Susan Collins says, Biden's package is way too big. Not sure if she's talking about the stimulus, though. That was good, Steve. That was very good. Congratulations. Kay says, yes, she is, Steve. Steve Wolfbrand says, hi, Dolores. Kay says, I love Ryan Grimm. Yeah, Ryan's pretty good. Steve Wolfbrand said, if Biden doesn't solve the COVID problem by 2022, the Democrats will be devastated in those elections. Back to the future. Kay says, yeah, a lot of us will be dead, right? Kay says, nothing, quote, affordable about the ACA, I know. Kay says, Obama sucks. Steve says, the UN names fracking Mike Bloomberg special envoy for climate change. Oh, great. Wonderful. Special envoy to whom? To whom? Steve Wolfbrand says, look, man, here's the deal. That's a bunch of malarkey. Steve Gonzo says, listen, fat. Kay says, we need Franken back. Steve Wolfbrand says, no, you're being ridiculous. Ha, ha, ha. Let's do some push-ups. Evelina says, you're maddeningly right, Dr. Joe. Steve Gonzo says, I need to, starting to pack on some quarantine pounds this year. And Deborah Wilson says, he acts so powerless. But wonder if Bernie discussed his pitiful performance in their meeting. I don't know. Did Bernie meet with Biden? Steve Wolfbrand says this quarantine is a bitch. Evelina says, maybe Biden could eradicate the virus if he wanted to. Yeah, in that 4 to 6 weeks we talked about. Yeah, he can eradicate the virus. He can certainly bring it under management. He can, from this point forward, if he does it right, he can get the same kind of results that New Zealand has, which means that our fatality rate per million would go up by another 5 deaths. Steve Wolfbrand said, but Biden better eradicate the virus. The clock is ticking. Why didn't he get the Senate to nuke the filibuster? They didn't even have to make it a permanent nuke. All they had to do was to vote for a nuke, vote for a nuking of the filibuster until the crisis is over, and for 1 year thereafter to give the economy time to recover. That's all the justification they had to use in order to get rid of it, saying, look, we're in a state of emergency. We can't afford to screw around with the filibuster. In this case, we're getting rid of the filibuster temporarily. And it's going to be gotten rid of for as long as the coronavirus crisis lasts, and for 1 year thereafter to allow the economy time to recover. Then the filibuster can come back if the majority of the Senate wants it. That's what they could have put into the rules. Kay says, that started the downhill slide for my Scott's painting house, a rehab business in North Carolina back then. And GM Shower says, I don't trust any of the good words from Democrats. It's all acting. They're as bad as the Republicans, only they're better at deceiving since they have different followers. I don't think they're any better at actually deceiving, GM. I mean, I think we all know that they're pretty bad. And if you want to say they're as bad, okay, as the Republicans, they're as bad as some of the Republicans, but they're not as bad as all the Republicans. And Steve says, Schumer's unfunny comedian pudgy daughter is a pig, okay, as well. Steve, I keep telling you, Amy Schumer is not Schumer's daughter. I think she's his niece or something like that. Steve Wolfbrand says, I do like Harry Reid for his UFO disclosure views, though. What? Harry Reid has had UFO experiences. Look at it. Yep. Steve says, identify yourself, laugh out loud, hashtag your papers. And Steve says, Harry Reid was raised in a whorehouse in Nevada. Steve says, I respect that for what it's worth. Harry Reid's also an old boxer, isn't he? He used to be a boxer. K. Clark Ryan says, we couldn't afford any ACA, and that is why my Scott is dead. Oh, bummer, it did that to us, too. Kay says, Scott died in January 2016. Steve Wolfbrand said, that's a shame. The ACA was never affordable. Warren Chamberlain said, we already got $600. And Warren Chamberlain says, but if they change the annual income amount, that would not be good. No, it would not be good. Kay says, Scott ended up going to doctors through a local charity. And they screwed him around too for months until he had cancer in his brain too. All the while taking money from that charity. I was so pissed I couldn't go to his appointments with him. I knew the difference because I worked for years in healthcare when it was nonprofit. The cancer spread all through his body. The only place he didn't have it was in his lungs, and he smoked Camels his whole life. Steve Wolfbrand said, I'm sorry, Kay. Evelina said, so Biden isn't helping out the working middle class, Kay, at all? Steve said, well, very little. Well, I don't know. It depends. The bill may still pass with the old eligibility criteria. And, of course, there is the unemployment insurance, Kay, for individuals, and there is also the help for small businesses, and there is the help as well for state and local governments so they can retain their employees, many of them of whom are working middle class. So let's look at this. Okay, let's look at this from a balanced point of view in terms of the economic aid. Then there's all the economic aid wrapped into it to help us get rid of COVID. So this is a bill we need. It is much better than a sharp stick in the eye. It's not enough yet. They need to pass a bill that gives everybody $2,000 a month, okay, for the duration of the crisis. They need to pass the Automatic Boost to Communities Act. By the way, I had a Twitter thread on that today, and you may want to go over and see the Twitter thread. There, it was about the Automatic Boost to Community Act. I replied to a tweet by Rashida Tlaib, the author of the act, supporting the act. Kay says, me too, Steve. I wish I had died as it ruined my life too. Steve Orban said, don't say that, Kay. It's always better to be alive. Who knows what tomorrow brings. Warren Chamberlain said, if we should get the $1,400 and keep the income eligibility at $75,000. You should get $2,000, Warren, and keep the eligibility at $75,000. Yes. And Kay says, my tomorrows look bleak still at this moment. Steve Wolfbrand says, at a minimum, Kay says, all I want is security in my old age, not to be had these days. Evelina says it is stupid. Steve Wolfbrand says, I'm going to switch from Democrats to People's Party registration. Apparently that's an option now here in California. Yeah, the People's Party is now in California, I hear. So it should be an option. Kay says, yes, it is, Steve. And Steve Gonzo says 4% of world population, 25% of the COVID cases. And Warren Chamberlain says temporarily suspending the filibuster would be a good idea. Yeah, it might be easier to get if you were going to temporarily suspend the filibuster till the crisis is over. It might be the protection that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema and John Tester need in order to vote for suspending the filibuster temporarily. That might be what they need. I hadn't thought of that idea before, but I just came up with it as we were talking here. And I think, okay, it may be a good idea. They might be amenable to that. It would seem like a reasonable compromise they were making. Just to be clear, because there are a lot of things that have to be done that which Democrats should not allow to be blocked by the filibuster. For example, the passage of H.R. 1, that bill to stop voting suppression, the gerrymandering, and other horrible practices, that bill could then pass with 50+1 votes. The bill to allow Puerto Rico to become a state, and the bill to allow D.C. to become a state, those things could also happen. There would be no problem also passing other bills to reform the police. Okay, if the filibuster was temporarily suspended, that would do us a world of good. Kay says, People's Party will never get on the ballot here in Ohio. Ohio is a ruined GOP state. Steve Gonzo says, Twitter's saying, rip People's Party. Something about rest in peace, People's Party. Something about Howie rejecting socialism. Howie is Howie Hawkins. He's the Howie that I know. And he wasn't running for the People's Party. He was running for the Green Party. So how is that going to rip the People's Party? I don't understand. Warren says, how do you define the middle class? Income, net worth. Steve Wolfbrand says, depends a lot, on where you live. Evelina says, yes, temporarily suspending the filibuster could certainly be good. That business of changing the eligibility criteria is going to cut out 45 million people, most of whom vote. So that is, for all intents and purposes, that is the middle class. Thea Swift says, Wyoming censures Cheney, says it intends to withhold any future political funding. I don't think it's the state, of Wyoming, Dia. It's the it's actually the Republican Party. Oh, you said the Wyoming GOP censures Cheney. Yes, that's correct. But that's because various state parties, including Wyoming, have been taken over by the Trumpists. So, yeah, they're going to censure Cheney. After all, she voted with Democrats. So, she was making it clear she was going to vote to impeach, to convict Donald Trump. Warren Chamberlain says yes. I guess that's it. I've covered every comment, I think. So, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for staying. I may see you again for some short ones tomorrow. I'll certainly try to get some in. And if not tomorrow, then on Monday. But I'll certainly see you again on Tuesday night if I don't have any technical problems and the creeks don't rise. So thank you for coming. Evelina says, but thank you with the U capitalized. Thank you, Evelina. I guess that means you like this one. And Kay says, thank you all for a great discussion. Kay, I love you all. We certainly love you, Kay. Steve says, good night. Good night, Steve. Steve Wolfbrand, that is. Thank you for coming, Steve. And thank you for the discussion. And thank you for the joke about Biden's package. Okay, folks, good night. See you soon.